let's jump in then. So as you know, my name's Allie. This is the Let's Make Up workshop, how to talk about what happened and move forward feeling closer. And I'm going to start by just giving you an overview of the agenda. By the way, as we're going, if you have a question, if you have a comment, feel free to just put it in the chat since I can't see all your faces at once. That way I'll know, it'll pop up for me, so I'll be able to answer that. But on the agenda today, we're going to start with an introduction to myself and to the Gottmans, who are the world-renowned couples therapists who created the process that I'll be teaching you tonight. Then we'll jump into some reflection on how does it usually go when you're trying to make up or talk about something that happened, talk about an argument or a fight. And then we'll learn the actual 5-step process to implement in your own life. And we'll do it with a step-by-step example. And then finally, if we have any really brave people at the end, we'll do a practice, or we'll also just go into a Q&A. So let's jump into the introduction. As you know, I'm Allie. I'm originally from the greater Boston area, but I've also lived in California, Utah, Texas, Italy, and will hopefully be moving to North Carolina sometime in the next year. And the path that brought me to relationship therapy started at my undergrad, where I minored in family studies. So it was classes on parenting, classes on relationships, classes on family finance. And I loved those classes because I felt like these are the things that will be most applicable to me throughout my entire life. But then I ended up majoring in Italian as my major, and I had no idea what to do with that when I graduated. So after college, my husband and I both taught with Teach for America. We taught middle school for a few years. And as a teacher, what I realized was that no matter how bright my student was, how amazing they were, if they had family issues at home, they were not going to be successful in school. They were going to be distracted, not have confidence, all sorts of stuff. And so that brought me back to my interest in relationships and family studies. And so moving from Texas to Boston, I started my grad program at Antioch University and majored or got a master's in couple and family therapy. So one of the certifications that I have is in Gottman Method Couples Therapy. And that brings me to their introduction. So John and Julie Gottman have done over 40 years of research on couples. They've written over 200 papers, so many books, the most famous of which is probably The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. And they've also created, through their research, a series of conversations for couples to have, depending on what support the couple needs at that time. So they have a conversation called the stress reducing conversation. There's one called Dreams Within Conflict. There's one all about compromise. And the one that we're learning today is called Aftermath of a Fight. And this one lets you truly kind of make up after an argument with understanding and empathy so that you can move forward. So before I move on, are there any questions about myself or the Gottmans in the chat, or you can just unmute? Okay, sounds good. So I want to start with a reflection question. I'm going to have you ponder. If you have something to write with, you can write this down. But what normally happens for you after a fight? What's the process that you go through after a fight? And I would love it if you can enter in the chat or unmute to share, or for not even for you specifically, but for any couple, what do you suspect might normally happen after a fight? I have to gauge and see, like, are we going to get some chats or not? No worries if not at all. I'll move on. But, oh, here we go. We go silent and try and avoid each other. Yes, that is so common. So the 4 most common, did I hear someone unmute? No. Okay. The 4 most common answers that I get when I'm working with couples are silent treatment, or we go to bed and never talk about it until the next blow up. Or maybe I appease my partner. I just say, fine, okay, let's do it your way. And then I'm resentful inside, but it's not worth it to bring it up. Or we try and talk about it over and over again, and it just makes things worse. So why do we get caught in these traps? I want you to reflect for a moment on, where did I learn my technique? So who did I learn the silent treatment from? Or where did I learn that burying my emotions will make everyone happy? Just ponder this for a minute. And as you do, think about, where did I learn these behaviors? I am actually going to invite you to actively have compassion for and forgive yourself. So what that sounds like is, I forgive myself for acting that way when I didn't know any better. And now that I'm learning, I have the opportunity to make different choices. Sometimes we get stuck in a shame cycle of, I always do this, but it's important to just forgive ourselves and move forward once we know better. So today, what we're going to learn is how to move away from these things and into a clear understanding. And it's a 5-step process. This is the brief overview before we go into each step. But Aftermath of a Fight conversation is designed to help you better understand a disagreement and increase your empathy. And what this works really well in doing is helping you slow down. A lot of times during a fight, we're sped up, we're escalated. This helps you slow down and stay de-escalated. Also helps you have increased empathy and understanding for your partner, which is hard when you're in the heat of the moment. You're thinking, well, my perspective is right. It's hard to have empathy. And it'll help you understand what you're actually fighting about. Most of the time, it's not really about the dishes or about the weekend plans, or, like you'll see in just a minute, about the number of kids that you're going to have. So we're going to go through an example in using these 5 steps: feelings, realities, triggers, responsibility, and constructive plans. And in order to do that, I need to kind of give you an example of the fight. So we are going to use an example, a real life example that happened a few weeks ago to one of my friends, and they graciously allowed me to use this story anonymously. So here is what happened. Julia and Sam are a couple in the family planning phase of life. They have a 1-year-old son, and Julia owns her own business and is working part-time to support Sam as he finishes grad school. When they first got married, they both thought that they wanted 5 kids. And now, a few years and a child later, that number has gone down. The transition to parenthood has caused some strain on the relationship, but both are finding their groove and have begun conversations about when it might be a good time to start trying for their second. So that's the background on Julia and Sam. And here's the actual fight. A few days ago, the family went over to Sam's brother's house to spend time with his family. Sam's brother, Jeff, has 3 kids, and Jeff and his wife often seem pretty stressed out and tense. After leaving their house and on the drive home, Sam commented to Julia that after seeing how stressed out Jeff is all the time, he thinks maybe it would be best if him and Julia only have 2 kids. This comment triggered Julia. She reacted with frustration and defensiveness and kind of some rude comments. And in turn, Sam reacted and raised his voice and made some exasperated sounds. And the couple ended up having a long fight about how many hypothetical children that would be the right number for their family. So in the past, the couple might have had this fight, given each other some space, and decided, we don't need to talk about this. But this time, they want to process it to really deepen their understanding and figure out what happened so that they can avoid a repeat. So one question I have for you, you can show me with your hands, is, are they really fighting about the number of kids that they're going to have? Probably not. That's what it seems like on the surface, but there's likely something else going on. And so using this process, this 5-step process, we're going to figure out what that is. And as a helper, I'm going to invite my husband, Sean, in, and he's going to be Sam, and I'm going to be Julia. Say hi.
Hello. Hi.
He's graciously agreed to participate in this. Here we go. Step 1 of Aftermath of a Fight starts with this question: where was your head at? So I'm going to explain to you step 1. In this process, you and your partner are going to take turns going through the 5 steps. Step 1 is all about feelings. Where was your head at? You'll share what you felt, but not why yet. Keep your comments very simple and avoid saying, I felt like you, because then you're still talking about the other person. You need to talk about what you felt. So I love this list here because it gives so many examples of things you might not think about on a regular basis. Like, I felt misunderstood. I felt taken for granted. I felt foolish. All sorts of things. Using the example of Julia and Sam, let me make this smaller so I can see. Okay, using the example of Julia and Sam, we're going to demonstrate what this looks like. So imagine that we've had this fight about how many kids, where we've taken a break, and now we're coming back together and ready to process. So I would start, and I'm going to say, I felt defensive. I felt worried and afraid. I felt a little bit stubborn, and I felt like my opinion didn't matter.
I felt misunderstood. I felt frustrated. I felt overwhelmed and exhausted. And I felt like my opinion didn't matter.
Okay. So that's it. The first step is super simple. You're not diving into why yet. You're just acknowledging what is it that was happening for me and expressing that as simply as you can. Let me admit someone here. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do right now is actually take a minute and reflect on a recent argument or fight that you have had. And I want you to write down or think about what 3 feelings you would choose. So I'm going to give you a full minute to think about this. Imagine that scenario and pick 3 of these feelings that resonated with you. And if you're up for it, maybe share one of the feelings that you chose in the chat. So take a minute and reflect. You might look at this list and think, well, I felt a lot of these things, or maybe there's something that's not on the list that you feel often. But have that in mind, because as we go through the 5 steps, I'm going to have you come back to your own personal example and apply the steps to your personal example as we go. So step 2 is all about the question, what happened? But this is subjective. The really important thing to remember is with step 2 is that this will 100% guaranteed look different to both of you. The point of step 2 is not to fact check and figure out whose idea of what happened is right, but it's to express your perception of the events. And this is where a lot of couples get stuck, because you just keep debating, no, this happened, no, it was this, no, it was this. So go into it knowing that your perceptions are going to be different. So step 2, what happened, has 3 parts. Part A is you're going to take turn describing your perceptions, your own reality of what happened during the regrettable incident or the fight. Again, do not describe your partner. Describe your perceptions like a reporter, giving an objective blow-by-blow description. So say, I heard you saying, instead of you said, because again, it's all about what you experienced. Then it's really important to summarize and validate your partner's reality by saying something like this. It makes sense to me how you saw this and what your perceptions were. I can see why this upset you. Validation does not mean that you agree, but that you can understand even a part of your partner's experience of the incident. Most couples get stuck on this point because they think, I can't give any empathy or any validation because I don't agree with what happened, with what they're saying happened. But if you shift your mindset to think, if I were in their shoes and had perceived it like they're telling me they did, would it make sense? Would their reaction make sense? And oftentimes you'll be able to come up with some validation. So we're going to try this using the example of Julia and Sam. So Sam is going to share first his reality of what happened.
All right. So I had been with Jeff and his family. I felt overwhelmed by their stress and their negative attitudes. I associated that stress with their kids. And so in the car, I tried to express that to you. in a way that was half serious and half joking. I was also thinking a lot about how tired I am from school full time, how tired I'll be with our upcoming move and all the unknowns around that. And that made me think that maybe fewer kids would make things a little bit easier. When I made the comment about having fewer kids, I saw what I perceived to be a judgmental and disappointed look from you. And then I raised my voice and turned away, stopped really listening to you while you kept trying to talk about it.
Okay. So my summary is like, you were stressed out at their house, and part of it had to do with the kids. And when you got in the car with everything else going on in their life, you said, you kind of made a joke, but it was serious too, about maybe fewer kids would be easier, would be better. And then when you said that, you saw that I looked kind of judgmental, and that triggered you.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I missing anything?
No, I think you got it.
I think if I were to validate that, knowing how overwhelmed you are with school and with our move, it makes sense why the thought of more than 2 kids would be really overwhelming. And so I can see why you would have been feeling that. So Julia's turn for her reality. I also noticed the tension between Jeff and Sarah at their house, but I thought when I noticed that like they kind of always seem like that. I think it's more about their marriage than about their kids. And so I wasn't associating it with kids at all. I was actually enjoying watching our baby play with their kids and thinking how nice it is to be near family, and how fun that is. And so then when we got in the car and I heard you say you only wanted 2 kids, I just felt like first it was unfair to blame Sarah and Jeff blame their struggles on the number of kids that they have. So I started criticizing and then questioning you. And I also felt a little bit scared that maybe we have different ideas on what family size we should have. And so I kept trying to talk to you about it to see if we were on the same page.
Okay. So now let me make sure I heard all of that correctly. So you associate the stress in their life as being normal general stress, not necessarily tied to just kids. You enjoyed seeing our baby playing with their kids. You're gonna miss having family close by. When we got in the car, tell me what am I missing?
When we got in the car, I felt just scared that maybe we didn't have the same ideas, and that it was unfair to blame their problems on their kids.
Okay. So you didn't think it's not fair to blame the stress on their kids, and you also felt like you felt fear that we have different views about this big thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that I missed?
No.
Okay. I think if I were in your shoes, it would make sense the way that you're feeling. I think, yeah, I can understand what you're saying.
Okay. So the validation and summarizing part is important to make sure you're not missing anything. And that also will help your partner calm down. If any of this conversation starts to get you escalated, hearing that will help them calm down. All right, so let me go to step 3. Step 3, what was going on that had nothing to do with that moment? Oh, actually, sorry. With the different realities. Think for a minute about your own personal example, whatever argument you thought about for step 1, and just take a minute and reflect. What happened? What was your perception of what happened? And as you think about that, imagine as if you're watching a movie. Like, what did you do? What physical action did you take? Did you raise your voice? Kind of notice the process of what happened instead of necessarily what it was about. Just take a minute and reflect. Okay. So step 3, what was going on that had nothing to do with that moment? This step is all about external triggers. So oftentimes in arguments, a lot of what's going on doesn't really have to do with that topic. It has to do with, I didn't get any sleep last night, or we haven't gone on a date in 4 months. And so I'm already feeling a little bit rejected. So there's a lot of external stuff that impacts the in the moment argument. So the 3 parts to this are: first, what external forces escalated the interaction? Then think of a time when you had a similar set of feelings triggered in the past. Tell the story of that past moment to your partner so your partner can understand why that's a trigger for you. And then C, this goes along with B, share relevant stories. As you think about your early history or your childhood, is there a story you remember that related to what got triggered in you? So this would be called an enduring vulnerability. What this sounds like is, when this happened, I was reminded of a time when I felt judged. I'm very sensitive to that because, or when this happened, I was really hungry. And so I overreacted. Or I had just gotten a sensitive work email 10 minutes before we had this discussion, and that really impacted my mood. So it's important to name any external triggers. If Julia and Sam were doing this, we would take turns, and Julia will go first. So when we had the fight about the number of kids, I think one of my triggers was that because I grew up in such a big family, I feel a little fearful that I'll be judged if I have a small family. And I don't know, there's all this like stigma in my head about, will I be a legitimate mom if I just have 2 kids, only because I grew up in such a big family. And so I think those external fears were coming into play in that moment. Another trigger that popped up for me is, I remembered when we first had our child, how like lonely and hard those first few months were. And some of that loneliness came up again when you made the comment about 2 kids. I just remembered feeling that, and that kind of put me in a bad headspace.
So I felt out of control because of everything that's changing in our life right now, with the big move coming up, me needing to find a job. I felt ashamed that maybe I can't handle parenting. I can't meet your needs based on how hard the first few months were postpartum last time. I was in a bad mood anyway because I wanted to work out that morning, but we went to Jeff's house instead.
Okay. So you see there, even things like different expectations. He had wanted to work out instead of going to their house, which already had put him in a bad mood. These sorts of things impact the fight. And if you can acknowledge and recognize what those are and then share them with your partner, they'll be able to understand where you're coming from. A key reminder for this step, though, is talking about your triggers doesn't justify the behavior. So, for example, maybe you've been cheated on in the past, and so you're extra sensitive when your partner feels like, when you feel like your partner is pulling away from you. That having happened to you doesn't justify any behavior of yours that's inappropriate in your relationship, but it does explain context, and that can help you and your partner maybe tread differently or tread more lightly in the future. And then also, it's important for step 3 to just stick to the most relevant triggers and stories. So this isn't an invitation to bring up every time you've been hurt in the past. Oh, well, you did it this time, and you did it that time, and you did it the time before, and that's why I feel this way. Just choose one time that helps explain the context of why you reacted this way. So right now, I'm going to invite you to take a minute, think of your personal example fight, and list all of the other triggers that impacted how you showed up in that moment and why you felt what you felt. Take a minute and reflect. I know today, in our own personal example, I had been with the kids all day. Sean got home. I had been so proud of myself. They were already ready for bed. They were already eating dinner. And he seemed like in such a bad mood when he got home, and I was all offended. Turns out he hadn't eaten lunch and he was really hungry. And after you had some dinner, he said, can we have a restart? This is why I was acting that way. So external triggers are really important for helping you move forward and understand. Okay, step 4. This is when it's time for accountability. If I could go back, what would I do differently? Step 4, all about taking responsibility. Some questions to ask yourself are, what set me up for the miscommunication? I'll read some of these examples. Maybe I've been really stressed and irritable lately. Maybe I haven't expressed much appreciation towards you lately. Maybe I've been overly critical lately. It's important to think about, what things can I own up to that were setting me up for this miscommunication or argument? And then specifically, what do you regret? And what was your contribution to the regrettable incident or fight? So maybe I regret that I overreacted, or I was really grumpy and defensive, or I was so negative. We really like to put all the blame on our partner when things don't go well, but this step 4 is essential in moving forward because we have to take responsibility for our part in a pattern. Maybe the other person's part was bigger and more negative, but we still have to own up to what our contribution was in order to move forward. Then you actually do apologize in step 4. And if your partner accepts your apology, great. And then if not, you have to go back and figure out, what do they still need you to understand before they can accept the apology. So Sam is going to start with our example and share what he's taking responsibility for in the fight about how many kids to have.
I have not shared much of my inner world with you lately. And I regret that my stress came out through the sensitive topic of kids, when it really has to do with all the other big changes that are coming up. I have been running on empty this last semester, and I regret that it has made it difficult for me to appreciate all of the amazing moments with our family. I was really grumpy and negative, and I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. Thank you for explaining. I realize that I have not expressed much appreciation towards you lately for all of the things that you are doing. And I really regret that that might have added to you feeling like you can't measure up. So I want to apologize for that. As well as, like, I have to own up that, like, I haven't felt much confidence in myself as a mom lately, and those triggers came out as an attack toward you. And I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
So now take a minute and reflect on your own fight and choose a couple of these examples from what set me up for miscommunication on the left side of the screen. Either write them down or just think about them, but then process, what do you regret? What was your contribution? And what do you think you could apologize for in your own personal example? And just take a minute to reflect on that. Okay, we have made it to step 5. So my ask and my commitment. This is finally when you get to ask your partner to change. Step 5 is all about constructive plans. There are 2 questions in this one. What can my partner do or change to make this discussion go better next time? And then what do I actually commit to doing or changing to make this discussion go better next time? So in the Julia and Sam example, one thing that I can do to help the discussion go better next time, one thing that you can do to help the discussion go better next time is to not compare our situation to someone else's. I think it would help me feel safer if I knew that you were influenced by our situation and not someone else's perceived situation, like your brother's. One thing that I commit to doing is to asking you supportive and understanding questions if you bring up this concern, instead of jumping to fear and assumptions like I did. Is that something that you can do, the not comparing?
Yeah. I'll try.
Thanks.
All right. One thing that you can do to help the discussion go better next time is to stay more in the present. I think this time we ended up hypothesizing about 5-10 years from now. It would help me if we kind of focus the conversation to just the next year ahead. And one thing that I commit to doing is to find more joy in fatherhood. I commit to sharing with you at least one moment a week when I felt really happy with our family and my role as a dad.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. And thank you. Okay, we processed that well. Everyone say thank you to Sean. He's going to go now. So it's your turn to think about your own example and write down a commitment that you would make going forward based on your own behavior, and write down an ask that you have for your partner in your own personal example. So I'll let you take just a minute to think about that. This is a fun part of the process because I'm not sure if you noticed, but steps 1 through 4 are all you talking about you. And it's not until step 5 that you really talk about what the other person can change. This is a key thing to remember as you go through the aftermath of a fight conversation, because oftentimes where people go wrong is they start the makeup conversation by saying, well, you said this and you did this and you made me feel this. And immediately when you go in with you, the other person's going to feel defensive. So in this conversation, it's designed to have steps 1 through 4 be you talking about yourself. I felt this. I said this. I did this. I can own up to this. And then at the end, you say, and can you make this change? And at that point, they're going to be much more willing to be receptive to that and to listen to that. You just won't be successful if you jump in immediately by talking about what the other person did. Okay. I'm not sure if we'll get this, but I want to ask, do we have a couple or an individual on here who is willing to share some of their responses as they reflected on their own fight? Totally fine if not. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. So how do I actually implement this with my partner? There are 5 steps. First, it takes 2 people. So if you've watched this alone tonight, if you're here alone, it takes 2. Have your partner watch the replay. You're going to get an email with this video with me explaining the 5 steps. Have them watch it. In that email, you're also going to get the slides that have the 5 steps. So print that out so you have it on hand to physically use as a guide. Then step 3, decide how long of a break you need post-fight before talking. So the Gottmans, who again created this conversation, in their research, they found that it takes a full 20 minutes for someone's nervous system to calm down so that they're out of fight, flight, freeze mode. So a general recommendation is after you have a big fight, take at least 20 minutes apart, at least 20 minutes to really regulate and calm down before having this conversation. A lot of couples need a little bit more than that, maybe an hour. But what's important is that you agree on this beforehand, because in many partnerships, one partner likes to take a day and the other partner likes to take an hour, and then they butt heads over that. So have a conversation about what's a happy medium for us. I need to know that I can trust after 5 hours, we'll be able to talk about this. Have that conversation together. Then step 4 is the first few times you do this, stick to the script. So actually go through reading step 1 through 5, take turns, do not deviate away from the script. This is so important the first few times you do it, because if you deviate right from the start, you're probably going to get off track. Then step 5, once you've done this enough that it feels like a little bit more muscle memory, you can ditch the script. It can be more dynamic and less scripted. So one thing that I have noticed in my own life since becoming a couples therapist is that I don't necessarily have fewer fights with my partner, but we are able to make up and move on so much faster because of these 5 steps. We don't get stuck in that 2 or 3 day grumpy cycle anymore. And so that's a big benefit of following this. Okay. I want to answer any and all questions that you have about these 5 steps. Oh wait, I'm missing. Yeah, I'll start with answering questions about this, and then I have one more slide on some extra pointers. But you can enter in the chat, or you just unmute for now. What questions do you have about the 5 steps that we went over? You're making it easy for me, way too easy.
Allie, I have a question.
Go for it.
And this has been so helpful. Thank you so much. I'm just curious let's see. What if it's difficult for you to like recognize your triggers? But like just with anger in general, you just feel like an angry person. You feel like there's like something helpful to recognize if it's not an obvious like recall to past offenses or like, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think one thing I would recommend is starting out by doing this retroactively. So think about the last week, all the times when you felt really, really angry, and do like a little bit of deep diving. What do I remember about that morning? Did I sleep well that night? Did I eat breakfast that night? Try and think back to the past experiences and just notice if you see any patterns about like physical circumstances. So how well you slept, how well you ate, if you worked out, etc. Also time of day, also time of month. Make note of those patterns. And then I would make a list of like, what are some recurring topics that we fight about? Maybe we always fight about chores, or we always fight about finances. And then once you've identified that topic, go back and think, okay, do I have any triggers from childhood about one of these topics? Do I have any triggers from my parents about one of these topics? So start by thinking about past experiences. And then once you're more aware, that should help you in the moment be able to recognize them a little bit faster.
Yeah, that's so good. Okay, that gives me a lot of guidance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions about the 5 steps?
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you just explain the difference between explaining and justifying? I feel like for me, I get caught up in a lot of explaining and re-explaining, and then basically I'm just making a bunch of excuses and re-arguing the whole thing.
Yeah. Do you think that would fall into kind of step 2, like explaining what happened?
I wrote it down under the what was going on that had nothing to do with that moment part.
Okay.
But I think it just came up in conversation maybe. So
Yeah, okay, explaining versus justifying. So like explaining that this was a trigger for me instead of saying it's okay that I did this because of my trigger. Yeah. Let's think about that. I think if you stick to explaining, you say, I was impacted by this thing that happened, and I recognize that, but I still know that that doesn't make it okay that I reacted the way I did. So even though I raised my voice at you because this other thing has happened 10 times and it's a really big trigger for me, that doesn't mean it's okay that I raised my voice. It makes sense why I did. That's an explanation for it, but I'm not justifying saying I have every right to raise my voice at you because of that. Does that help?
yeah, I think that sounds good. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Great question. Thank you. Any other
Thanks.
questions about the 5 steps? Okay, I'll go on to one more slide on some extra pointers. So the first one is complain, don't blame, or complain, don't criticize. So to distinguish between complaining and criticizing, a complaint is about something that a person did, a behavior that they did. A criticism is about their character. So let's say my partner has been on their phone for hours. My complaint would be, it really bothers me when you spend 5 hours on your phone at a time because I feel like our family's neglected. A criticism would be, you are a really lazy and unhelpful person because you're spending so much time on your phone. So the complaint is about the behavior. The criticism is about their character. You're lazy and unhelpful. And so think about how you talk to your partner and really make sure when you have a complaint, which is natural and normal to have a complaint, that you don't criticize their character, but you focus on the behavior. They'll be more receptive to that. Then we have I instead of you. So we saw this in the first step, the feelings. I felt judged instead of you were so judgmental. I felt really sad instead of you're so mean to me. Sticking again with I first will help them be more receptive to hearing you out. Be clear. It's easy to beat around the bush and not say what we really mean, but being clear can make all the difference. Let's say, for example, and I know I'm using so many little kid examples today. Let's say there were a bunch of dirty diapers and I said to my partner, wow, you've been super helpful today. Instead of, hey, will you please take that dirty diaper out? Being clear will help things go so much better. Don't store things up. Sometimes we store things up and kind of keep a tally in our head about all the times we've been hurt, but we don't actually say anything. And then we just blow up. Try and make a habit of having a check-in with your partner at least once a week, where you go through and talk about, did anything happen this week that was really hard or upsetting for me that I need to get off my chest now so I don't store it up? Be appreciative. The Gottmans found that couples who rate themselves as happy have a 20-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. So that means for every mean word or rude look, they've got 20 positives. Maybe that's giving each other a hug or making them a coffee or whatever it is. And part of this can be appreciation. Focus on appreciating your partner enough so that when you do have a negative incident, it doesn't ruin everything. They have, if you think about it like a bank account, every appreciation is like you depositing money into their emotional bank account. Then when you have a negative interaction and you withdraw some money, they still have a large store in there so that the relationship can be thriving. But if you're never appreciating, if you're never having these positive interactions, as soon as you have a negative one, they're going to feel like they are in the red and it's not going to go well. And finally, practice makes progress. Sometimes when I introduce these conversations to couples, they're like, really, like, use the script. This feels really weird. But when you actually practice it and really sit down and do it and follow the script, you will see progress. Communication is a learned behavior. It's something you can learn. Just because you haven't been good at it doesn't mean you can't be great at it. And so practice really makes progress. I see something in the chat. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. She said, it's made me realize that my relationship is not as bad as I have made it out to be. That is really helpful to hear. Any questions about these extra pointers?
Could you explain a little more about don't store things up? I think maybe I missed something there.
Yeah, don't store things up. Essentially, if something's bothering you, express it. Don't kind of bury and bury and bury for, sometimes it can be years of burying something before you express it. Sometimes, like, think of a couple that they're getting divorced and one partner says, I'm totally blindsided. I had no idea this was coming. And the other partner says, well, it's obvious to me. They might have been storing a lot of things up without expressing it along the way. So it's just trying to get in the habit of, when you are upset by something, express it as soon as feels safe or as soon as you can, so that you can release that tension and the resentment doesn't continue to build. One way that couples can do this successfully is by putting on your calendar like a weekly check-in. Maybe it's Sunday morning, and every Sunday morning you sit down for 30 minutes and you talk about things that went well that week, things that didn't go so well that week, what you want to do to support your partner, and what support you need from your partner. And just having that in the calendar already can take the pressure off of like, oh, I need to tell them what's wrong. You can think, okay, Sunday, we're going to have this conversation. It's going to be a safe space. We're both going to share, and then we can move on with our week. So that's one way to implement that. That was a lot of me talking.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Is that also along the ways, along the lines of maybe holding grudges too? Or I guess
Yeah.
if you have this safe space on a regular basis, it'll avoid that from happening.
Yeah. Holding grudges is really, really hard because sometimes we're really hurt by a big thing, and it's super hard to let go of that. One thing that can be helpful is if you have the opportunity to go to individual therapy, say you have a big grudge, which a lot of people do, and that's okay, working through that individually with a therapist, being able to let some of that go, some of that pain and tension go, so that you can show up in the relationship with a little more positivity.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay. Okay, well, that is the aftermath of a fight conversation. Like I said, you are going to be getting the slides with the steps in your email, as well as the full replay that you can share with your partner or with a friend if you want to. If you have any questions for me that come up after the fact, you can email me. If you did enjoy the workshop, it would be super helpful for me if you left a review. You can DM me on Instagram or email me just straight back to the emails that you were getting about the workshop. But thank you so much for attending. And is there anything else